Well, good morning, everybody. That was pretty good. That was pretty good. You guys did well. I'm proud of you. I'm playing a little hurt today. Some of you might be able to hear it in my voice. I realize every time I am sick in front of a room like this, I get a lot of very concerned mom looks. And I don't know about you guys, but whenever you're feeling well, you get a little help from your friends. So we're gonna have two guests for the price of one today. So
I'm just closing my eyes because I like the way you sound.
Yeah,
I like the way you look too.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I'm liking the way you sound.
Yeah.
Ooh, that was close. Getting trouble over here.
Okay. So I'm joined by Pastor Jake, and obviously, as you guys can see, Pastor Jake and I have a very serious and professional relationship. But Jake, I wanted you to come up here first because one of the things that I'm mindful of as we started having these conversations, this is the third time I'm here, that a conversation around generosity can sometimes get a little rigid for people. And what I'm curious about for you is when you, even just entering into this series, I'm curious how you talk to folks about generosity and how you help make this concept that is usually met with a ton of fear or church hurt or lack of understanding begin to make more sense. How do you start this conversation as a pastor?
Yeah, so the first thing I started doing is I started watching a bunch of prosperity preachers. That's always a great place that's a joke. You can laugh at that. No, but as someone, my dad's a pastor, my family's always been in church, so generosity was what we were taught just growing up. This is what you do. These are the things you do. So that was always a part of it. But when I became a pastor, there was a lot of people that attended our churches that don't have a faith background, don't have a faith memory. And the idea of giving to something with regularity when you have needs didn't make any sense. And so whenever I would talk with people, I would always frame it in two ways. Generosity and giving, tithing, whatever it is, it's twofold. It's about worship and it's also about discipleship. And so Zach's going to come up here and talk about the really nitty-gritty tips and tricks and kind of hacks of what that looks like to help be a more generous person, kind of the background. I want to give the spiritual side of that, but also doing the tips and trips and the hacks, that's a spiritual practice too. I pray every day. It's something that I do with my body. It's physical, but it's also something spiritual. So when I talk with people, just how we in church, corporate worship, one of the ways we worship is by singing together. Our generosity is no different. Same thing with discipleship. We read the scriptures, we sit together in small groups, and we talk with one another. We call someone up when they're not feeling well. We show up with food or diapers when someone is having a new baby. It's the same thing with generosity. That's what generosity does, is it helps us see the needs of those around us. And when you become a generous person, one, you're worshiping. You're taking what you have and you're saying, okay, God, what can I do with this? And then also you're taking what you have through discipleship and it's turning your heart away from just yourself to seeing the needs of those around us. And so when churches practice generosity, churches are practicing being much more community driven. Because when you are consistently looking at what you have and you're saying this is for the benefit of others, it's hard to be as selfish as we often come off. It's hard to answer that question that Cain was asked where he's like, well, I'm not my brother's keeper. When it's no, actually you are. We have a shared humanity. We are in this together. We have shared land, shared space, shared resources, and we actually are our brother's keeper. If our neighbors aren't doing well, then guess what? We aren't doing well because we're in this together with one another.
That's so good. So you brought it up, so I'm going to ask about it. When you are interacting with folks whose experience around church and generosity is far too close to a prosperity gospel type of message, which I would appreciate you defining just for if that's a new term for folks.
Yeah.
How do you help folks kind of start with healing? Because I think so much of that winds up becoming damaging to people where they can't even internalize what you're describing because they only know the church doing this wrong.
Yeah. So health and wealth, prosperity gospel is this idea that God's kind of like a vending machine. You have your spiritual coins, you put it in, You push the button, you're going to get what you're looking for, or what you desire. Not only are you going to get what you're looking for or what you desire, but you're going to get it above and beyond what you put in. God's just going to grow your Roth IRA, and you're just going to flourish and do wonderful things because God loves you. God does love you, but also that's just not how the world works. You can do all the right things, make all the right decisions, and get the wrong outcome. And then when you're in that type of theological system, what are you left with? Okay, so I did what I was supposed to do, and I didn't get what I was supposed to get. If God loves me and God wants bountiful for me, then what's the logical conclusion that we arrive at? I did something wrong. I messed up. There's some sort of sin that is keeping God's blessings from getting to me, or some side of sin of a family member. And so that system really hurts us. And then it makes God out to be, okay, God, why are you withholding blessings from people? You know, it's the gospel that says, you know, if someone has thirsty, you're going to give a cup of cold water. Like, what kind of God is this? And so when talking with people that come from that, there are a lot of deep hurts. There's this belief that there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
They don't quite see themselves as image bearers. And they walk and live and operate out of so much shame and guilt. And those are terrible motivators for sustainability and for formation. I mean, those of you who have been parents, those of you that are in groups, relationships, shame and guilt does not motivate you to be a better spouse, a better mother, a better grandma, a better coworker, does it? It just doesn't. Yeah. And so that system creates a lot of guilt, and it creates a lot of shame. And it's really hard to flourish in spaces like that. And so when I talk with people, I undo a lot of that.
Yeah.
Because it's just not how it works.
And that's, it always comes back. Pastor Jake, in one of the first conversations that I got to see him have, used this expression, we talk to people rather than about them. And my encouragement here is, the reason I wanted Pastor Jake to come up here first is, you mentioned that the generosity is a practice. This is something that I fully believe that this church is trying to pursue in all sense of submitting all of this to God, in all sense of the Holy Spirit. But it's something that if you are having questions related to generosity, no matter how specific, I do hope you feel empowered to approach Pastor Pamela, Pastor Jake, folks who are here. If you are not from this church, I hope you feel that connection to your own home church, because it's the kind of thing that too often trips people up. And I fundamentally don't believe it has to, because I get to sit under the leadership of folks like Pastor Jake and go, oh, that makes sense to me. Now I can apply it to my own life now that we've had the conversation. So, Pastor Jake, thank you for getting us started. I'm going to have Zac Larson coming up here now next. Everybody give it up for Pastor Jake real quick.
All right. Well, thank you for letting me be with you. And those of you who are here in the worship center on Sunday, this is the segue, just letting Zac get up here. This is not stolen, by the way. This was bought and paid for by someone else, but no. Nice. I'm kidding.
Nice. Zac, welcome back to Tuesday morning.
Thanks. This feels a little more relaxed than Sunday morning. It's a comfortable crowd, and it's good to be here.
Yeah, I remember asking, I said when I started, this was my first women's Bible study, but I heard this isn't yours.
No, I feel right at home.
Yeah.
Yes. Going back 20 years or so, but
okay.
I was the only male, I believe, in the women's Tuesday morning growth groups. So, and it changed my life.
I'm not 100% sure what you're applauding, but either way, works out great. So, Zac, I had Pastor Jake start because I wanted to make sure that this is a conversation that connects both to some of the practical things you described on Sunday morning, as well as the spiritual root of all of these practical things. But I want to lean into a lot of what you described on Sunday. I also want to talk about your book, which is Retire Intentionally, which we'll talk about here a little bit towards the end. Anytime someone writes a book, it's amazing to me. It feels like a magic trick. That made it sound like I don't know how to read. I do read books, but here's what I want to start with. So when you were, during your message, you talked about how there was this quote about, hey, like, don't worry. And so much of the conversation that we have around generosity is wrapped up in fear that you mentioned this, that, I want to be generous, but what if something happens where my kids need some of those resources, or anxiety about the unpredictability of the future. And what I'm curious about is, you as a financial advisor, when you're meeting with folks and you're having some of these conversations, how do you see fear getting in the way of what God might be asking of folks to how they can be using their resources?
Worry is a constant. I think right now it's talked about how much anxiety that kids have and adults have, and we all struggle with it, but it's not a new concept.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there in Scripture from 2,000 years ago, and I think God gets that. And it's there when God brought manna from heaven to his people, and right now there's not manna from heaven dropping. And so it's like we have this finite pool of resources, and especially if people are already retired or they're done with their career of earning money, you look at this finite pool and you say, how is that supposed to last? And it's concerning.
Right. It's interesting because I think one of the things that stands out to me about the conversation around our financial resources is you can Google anything related to this and find 1,000 different examples of what someone is saying to be true. And what I really appreciated about your message, and what I really appreciated about the book and how you clearly are as a leader here, is you root all of the practical tips within the context of Scripture. Now, you talked about this, you call your PCH framework. I want you to define that for folks, because it was helpful for me to think about, when we talk about generosity, it is independent of a financial number. It is independent of, because my number is going to be different than your number, and my number right now is going to be different than my number from 10 years ago. So can you help folks understand what do you mean by PCH? Because I want to dive into a couple stuff there.
For sure. So it's an acronym. Obviously, PCH stands for picture, commit, and habits, but it also makes us think of other things in our life. So for me, I use the visual of the Pacific Coast Highway. I want to ride my bike down that someday. Anybody want to join me? Okay, I got a couple back there that.
Anyone not want to join him? Okay, just checking.
There's some here who may know another acronym of PCH. Anyone remember the Publishers Clearinghouse?
Wow, good pull.
Do you even know what that is?
Hey, I saw the History Channel before.
Yeah, right. So Publishers Clearinghouse, you could win your $1 million. And I've used this visual before. Like, if you want $1 million, there's probably better ways to go create that than putting your entry in and hoping that Ed McMahon shows up with a check, right? So the P is we can't just say we want to be more generous, or I want to give more money, or I want to do more to help people. We have to picture what that would feel like in our lives. And I want to share just a very quick story that it didn't fit into the message the other day, but I kept using this phrase, generosity is for us, not from us. And often we get bombarded with messages of like a quid pro quo, that if you give more, you get more. And I don't think that's what God is telling us either. Like, there's no correlation that if you're giving more money, you're going to end up with a bigger net worth. That's called a prosperity gospel, and I don't think that's what God is trying to convey to us.
Sure.
But I do firmly believe there's more in store for us when we give. And just a quick story to this, I told several stories of how I was bad at projects, but we had a big project at our house a few years ago, and there was this amazing guy that we got to know who was a carpenter there. And he was above and beyond all the time, and through that, he's telling me stories of a cool trip he's about to take, where he's going to take his son to a golf course called TPC Sawgrass.
Oh, wow.
Which TPC is like this famous golf course, magical experience. And I was lucky enough to go there years back. And he was talking about how much it cost. And so there's the reality of like a cool experience, but how much it costs. And Kristen and I talked, and we said, let's just do something nice to help him. So we gave him a couple $100 as a thank you when he was done with this project for him and his son to get a shirt at the golf course. And we did it, and he was grateful, and we moved on, and I had totally forgotten. And then he was back at our house last week, 3 years later, and I forgot that we had done this, and he spent at least 10 minutes telling us a story of their experience there, and he still remembered that we had given him that money, and he still has the shirt, and he's so grateful. And I just thought that was a moment where generosity it didn't feel like it was from me at all, and it was totally for me because my day got so better from the story that he shared.
I love that. And I love examples like that because I think too often in our conversation around generosity, we wind up wrapping it up in these large societal challenges or these large initiatives of trying to support, churches that are doing great work. And I love stories like that because it helps make this how we actually live generosity out is much more in the sense of loving our neighbor, is much more in the sense of how we can be aware of opportunities that God might be bringing to us. Because you talked about in your message about how busyness gets in the way of generosity so often. Like how do you and Kristen begin to try to protect your schedule so that God can bring more opportunities like that towards you?
Yeah, so you just use a cool phrase, love your neighbor, but what's it go on to say? Love your neighbor as yourself. And I think there are times when we forget to love ourselves.
Say it louder for the people in the back. Yes.
So we talk at work a lot about live generously, but that's not just always doing more for someone who's downtrodden or someone who needs it. Maybe it's doing more for your family. And maybe it's being generous to yourself to say, like, I can take this Sabbath to rest. I can take this vacation for myself. I can take my kids on this trip. I can do something with a friend or for a friend. And they create really cool experiences. And so that's something that we have tried to get better at as our kids have gotten older and given us a little bit of space to do that.
Yeah. You have 4 boys. And one of the things that stands out to me is whenever I see leaders like you, I'm reminded that the ways in which I talk about the busyness of my schedule is so subjective and so easy to change. Because I don't know how I have 3 children, all of whom are small. But and you guys know this, when you add another child, having 4 kids is like I heard Jim Gaffigan say this once. It's like drowning and someone hands you a baby. I like jokes like that because some of you hated that joke and a lot of you really liked it. But my curiosity there is you guys have to do work to create that space, and how are you helping your boys begin to see that? Because I imagine there's a level of education from, hey, I'm intentionally doing this, to now just it's part of the water they're swimming in.
Yeah, part of it is modeling the behavior. And now that they're getting older, they see it, and I see some of their habits picking up I'm like, oh, they have been aware. They've seen some of it. And part of it is just asking questions that are often met with like one-word answers of like, I don't know. Well, I guess that's a 3-word answer. But last night, Kristen and I had a dinner date out, and we were talking about our commitment for what we're going to do at Good Shepherd for Forward, and we were talking about some generosity that we want to do through end of the year things. And so we have a giving account. It's a charitable giving tool that maybe we'll talk about later, but we're actually like at dinner sending money out of our account to places that we care about. And before that, Kristen asked our boys, told them what we were doing, and said, well, what are places you care about? And they're like, I don't know. They just never thought of it that way. And so they started to list some things randomly, but it was recognition for me that we're all at different points. And if you're at a point where you've never thought about, well, what are the causes important to me? Then maybe it's a fun time to do that.
Sure. That's awesome. Because I imagine when you see your boys start to do that work, you get to see some of them might have said something that would have surprised you, or you get to see the ways in which God is trying to reach them where they're at. Because again, this thing that I think trips up people so often in these conversations is if generosity is something that God wants for us, not from us, then that is independent of a financial resource. When we talk about Forward at Good Shepherd, we talk about a $9 million goal. God could just, manifest $9 million, right? And that'd be a really cool magic trick. But that has nothing to do with the principles of what Zach's describing or the spiritual disciplines that Jake was describing earlier. It has everything to do, like, that's what we're after with this conversation on generosity, is heart change and heart postures.
Let's go back to that PCH real quick. Yeah. So just picture your life, and you've carved out time, and you're doing more for yourself or for a friend or a family or a charity or a nonprofit, and the feelings and emotions you get from that, and you say, okay, I want that, I'm committed to it. And then we didn't spend a lot of time on this in the message, but it's the habits. And I'm going to tell a really dumb story, and I'm just going to be vulnerable for a second. But there was a long stretch where I was not very good at flossing my teeth. Now, to be clear, I did brush them very well, but I didn't floss them. And what do you hear when you go to the dentist? You got to floss your teeth. And I'm a big believer in creating incremental habits. That's just how I am. So I said, I got to be better at this. I'm committed to it. I'm going to commit to flossing one tooth per day. Now, how dumb is that, right? So you brush and you get the floss out and you're like, all right, I got my one done. But I'll be honest, there were times where I actually threw the floss away because I'm like, I'm tired, I'm going to bed, I did my one tooth. But I incrementally did more, and I'm proud to say that I floss every night now. Okay, my dentist is very happy too, but think about how dumb that is, yet what it did for me is it allowed me to create a habit that I felt like I could handle step by step. And maybe generosity is something like that, where you say, I know where I want to get, but I can't get there right now. So I'm going to do this one incremental step. As dumb as it feels to me, I can make that commitment and make it a habit.
That's really brilliant. Like, that is a very silly story, but that's a really great way of looking at it. In real time, that's me going, so what is my one tooth? So I want to talk about the book. So the book, like I said, is Retire Intentionally, Stories and Strategies to Spend, Give, and Live with Confidence by Zac Larson, who is Zach. So here's my question to you. The conversation around retirement, the conversation around financial resources is filled with so much head knowledge and so much information. So what motivated you to write the book? Like, what made you go, this is something that I think is not in the conversation right now?
The first thing is I wanted to give voice to our clients who have been a huge blessing to us.
Where do you work? I should have led with that.
I have a financial planning company here in Naperville. It's called IntentGen Financial Partners. The word is a made-up word, but it's two words smushed together, intentional and generous. And my partner, Corey Schmidt, and I, Corey and Tanya and his family are members here. We've been working together for about 20 years. We have another partner. His name is Jacob Schatz, and his parents have been members here for a long time. Karen was involved with starting the preschool. So we've been part of this community, but we try to help people think about their money purposefully and attach purpose to the money that you have and say, what are we ultimately trying to do with it? And there's people that have done really cool things, and it's not always about giving more. Maybe it's about thoughtfully using it to do something that's always been on their bucket list that they never felt the confidence to do.
So when early in the book, you say retirement is less about an ending and more about a beginning. And I think I like talking about stuff like retirement because for some of you, that is a distant future. For some of you, that is a near future. And for some of you, that's a thing that's already happened milestone-wise in your life. So when you talk about retirement, you get to kind of bring a lot of folks together. My curiosity is, there's a lot of common misconceptions or ways that people make mistakes in this conversation. How do you try to, like, for lack of a better term, what's your message to folks who are retiring unintentionally?
Yeah. I will address that specific, but let me give you a backdrop to what I'm up against at home and in my personal life. So I mentioned my parents are both pastors, and my mom is a wonderful woman who's strong in her beliefs. And one of her beliefs is that God calls each of us to work to do in this life. And so before she had even read this book, she's like, I'm going to write a scriptural book to go along with this that talks about why maybe none of us should retire. And I was like, Mom, can you just read the book first? Give me a chance.
Hilarious.
Because I don't know that biblically the retirement concept is there, right? Regardless of your age, your phase in life, your career, we're all called to do God's work. And that's what I mean by retirement can be a beginning and not an ending. So there's a lot of people that kind of retire accidentally because they say, well, I'm sick of my work. Get me out of here. I have no idea what I want to do. And I'd like to use Pastor Greg as an example. He retired intentionally from parish ministry because he was retiring to something with World Vision. He felt a calling to go do that, and he had a chapter where he did that, and then he's called back into this place, which has been wonderful. And we hope that as we're working with people, retirement becomes something that is by choice.
Sure.
That they have the freedom to do it financially if they're ready. But if you have skills and expertise and are contributing to places that are meaningful, why in the world would you stop doing that?
Yeah. How much of that is a trend? You know, I'm thinking about my own parents, and my dad was a talk show radio host for 40 years. And
that's why you're so good at this.
Yeah. I got into the family business. A quick side story about that. I was doing this for a couple years at Awana, and I remember the interview like verbatim where I went, "Oh, I'm just doing what my dad did." So sometimes this sneaks up on you. But what I was going to say was that he winds up being in this weird position where he's basically like an assembly line worker. He knows how to do one thing. The one thing he knows how to do, though, is incredibly specific and is in an industry that was collapsing in upon itself. But when he's talking about it, and I think, judging by some of the head nods in this room, there is this sense that retirement used to mean being put out to pasture. And I feel like the current trend right now is retirement is this beginning, not an ending. Is that what you're seeing with folks?
It is. And sometimes it does mean the cessation of work or the end of a career that they were in. But I love watching my kids, especially when they've been a little younger than now, where they don't have worry. They just have time, and they get to fill it with cool things. And for a lot of people, retirement can become that, where you now have the time that you did as a kid, hopefully a few resources on top of that, and then you get to choose, how am I going to use that to make a difference in the people and places that I care about?
The other thing that stands out to me is this conversation around our personal finances can wind up activating some level of a shame response. There's a level of, at least if nothing else, speaking for myself, where it's, oh, I should be doing X, or I should be doing this, or man, I've wasted money or wasted time with Y. How do you help folks see the opportunity with tools? You know, you mentioned the giving account tool that I was going to ask you about, where some of these resources are actually meant to activate your imagination and excite you, not remind you of previous mistakes.
Yeah, first of all, finance should be a judgment-free zone. I think we're all just trying to do the best that we can with what we have. We've learned things from our family, or we haven't learned things. It's just, we are where we are. So whatever has happened to this point doesn't matter, and that's what we try to help people with initially, is say, that's done. Let's move forward. And from that point, there are ways that everyone can take steps forward, and we can't always get to the ideal future that we want right away, but that PCH acronym is not just made up for a Sunday message. That's like daily how we're doing things in people's personal planning.
So if I'm someone who brings a lot of that shame into this conversation, if I'm someone who, thinking about folks, you talk about what we learn on finances. One of the interesting things that I've learned as an adult is looking at the ways in which my sister and I have processed the messages that we receive from our parents pretty differently when it comes to finances and a bunch of other things. How do you help folks move from that like shame to opportunity? Because as a financial advisor, you wind up being someone who helps them with money, someone who is a therapist, someone who's a pastor, someone who is a nurse in some cases. Like, how do you help folks how do you help folks believe that it's a judgment-free zone? Might be a shorter way to ask that question.
Well, we put our office right next to a psychiatrist's office.
Perfect.
So if it gets too deep, we just say
Sure.
you need to go to the other door.
That's perfect. Yeah.
I think it's just all about incremental steps.
Sure.
So if there is shame in choices that have been made, come to church, like listen to the pastors absolve that. I mean, we are forgiven in this, and finances are filled with grace just like church is filled with grace. If something's happened, you just figure out how to move forward from it. And unfortunately, we've had to work with that with clients. I mean, you hear about scams and things that have happened. I have a woman that I've worked with for years. She's in her 80s, and she fell in love with a man through an online relationship and was scammed for a huge amount of money. And the amount of shame she felt to even admit that. And my kids are going to be so upset with me. And we just had to get, by the way, she's not a member here. Don't try to guess who she is or whatever else, right? But I want to say that stuff happens. And she felt like she had done something so wrong. And I just said, you're the victim here. And we're all in ways victims of what we've learned or been taught or not taught or something done to us. And you just have to say, okay, this is where I am and how can I move forward with it?
Yeah. One of the things that stands out to me about you as a leader is you seem to have a lot of fun with finances that I don't think people tend to associate those two F words together.
Did he just use the F word at me?
I did in church. But one of the things that so you mentioned this giving account, and you talked about a couple of these different things in the book. But one of the things I'm curious about is what are the tools or resources that folks might not realize are available to them that you really like giving to people and equipping people with their finances?
So the first way that most of us have been taught to give, it may be something like what I shared, where you were given an allowance and you had to give some money out of that. So you're giving cash. And then as you grew up in your own finances, maybe you wrote a check or you put a gift on a credit card. And essentially that all comes back to our checking accounts.
Sure.
And most people's checking accounts, their balance is never quite what they want it to be. And so we see financial life end up like this very simply. Money comes in, I pay my bills, I pay my debts, I do some stuff I want, and at the end of the month, I'm filled with guilt and shame because I didn't save enough or I didn't give enough. And so we just try to flip the script and say, do what you value first, what you prioritize. So maybe give it first and then figure out what's left after that. But that's something that happens during what we call the accumulation years, like where you're saving, you're working, and more keeps coming in. And then we hit this time that we call the distribution years or utilization, where like you have what you have and you're trying to make it last. And that's maybe even harder to give at that point because you're like, well, this is my pool of money. And if I give out of it, then that pool is declining. So the same concept can happen though. You can pick an amount and you can say, this is what I want to give. And we clear it out of the checking account. We clear it out of the IRA bucket or the investment account. And we set it aside into what's called a giving account. The technical term for it is called a donor advised fund. But you can set your money to the side. It might even give you tax benefits where you pay less in taxes the year that you do it. But what it creates is this bucket of money that the only purpose for that is it has to go to a charitable organization that you care about. And so once it's there, then it does become fun.
Sure.
Because you can't take it back and spend it. You can't use it on a bill that you need to pay.
That's really fun. One of the things that I'm curious about is, so you also talk about giving from stored assets or giving, like some of these, I'm going to use the word creative. The reality is they're actually best practices. It's not necessarily that creative. There's been this weird, especially for folks closer to our age, of a lack of trust in experts. This thought that we can Google everything. One of you laughed at that, which is great. Makes me think you don't know how to spell Google, which is great. Here's my question. I'm not trying to ask you to like completely plug what you do, but there is a benefit for me when I hear someone like you talk where I go, oh, Zac can do that for me. What do you hope people who are walking into the door for the first time to your office understand about how you guys will work together? Like, what is the expert role versus their role?
Yeah, so not only can you Google everything to get an answer, but you can get the exact answer you want when you Google it.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to think something, just keep Googling and it will be fed to you to validate what you think is right. So that's a problem with experts, is there's an expert out there to affirm exactly what you want to hear. And so it's hard to be discerning in that, to say, well, who's the right person that I can talk to? And I guess the biggest thing is trust your gut and interview multiple people and find an accountability partner that you feel good about. And maybe it's just a friend or a family member or a pastor like I talked about, or an advisor. But when we become that advisor, or we call them partnerships, when we become that partner for people, then there's three things that we look at. One, and this is centered around retirement, but if you're not quite at that phase, it fits your phase of life as well. But the first is to retire confident. Like, put some tools in place so that you understand to the level you want to how things work. And you don't have to become an expert or a rocket scientist, but you can grasp things very well, and you should get to a place where you're confident about it. The second thing is, we want people to retire smart. Like, do the best practices. Be efficient with stuff. It's your money. Try to maximize it, and then you can either spend more or give more rather than waste more.
Yeah.
And then the third is retire well, which just means like do it as part of community. And we try to do that, to say, let's have some fun together. Let's go volunteer together. Let's learn together. Let's just go socialize and have a good time together.
Yeah. All right. 2 last questions. Where can people learn more about you and your company, and potentially you can be that partner for them? And also, where can people get the book?
Well, first of all, this is actually like almost embarrassing for me, because I had zero intention or expectation of this coming in. They just asked me 2 months ago to do a message on generosity, and I said I'd absolutely love to do that. And then Jake plugged my book on Sunday, and I was mortified.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
And then this. So I apologize if it feels like a commercial. It was not meant to be.
No, I was meant to do the commercial. Let's be clear about that. When someone hands me a resource like this, and what I'm good at is talking into a microphone, I see it as my responsibility, in all sincerity, to make sure people are aware of it. If this is a benefit to me in my life, I trust that it can be a benefit to yours. How else can I endorse this so Zac doesn't have to? This is a book that will, you'll actually grow some hair back if you read this book. No. Sincerely, that's...
I'm going to start reading right now.
Nice. Zac, no, thank you for saying that. Zac did not want this, but I want to make sure that you guys know that I did.
To start with, there are other very, very good financial advisors within our congregation. So I would encourage you to say, reach out amongst your peers and say, who do they know? Who do they work with? And interview lots of people and get comfortable, right? But if you say that might be someone that I want to talk to, our company is well equipped with multiple advisors and a great team. Our company is called IntentGen. It's IntentGen. So intentional and generous, IntentGen.com. If you're interested in reading the book, you can find it on Amazon. Just search Retire Intentionally and in my name, it'll pop up. And we'd love to have conversations.
Thank you for listening to the Encounter Faith podcast. This podcast is a service of G. Shep Productions from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Naperville, Illinois. All rights reserved. If you're in the area, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning at our 9 a.m. or 10:45 services. At Good Shepherd, we are inviting everyone to walk together in the calling of Christ for a life of eternal impact. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Ross Cochran. And our theme song is Wake the Earth by 1111 Worship. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again soon.